of e-witness. All yours.
Good evening. This being Tuesday, October 6, 2020, we'll be calling this meeting of the Committee on Ordinance and Rules to order. Due to the fact that we are doing these meetings on Zoom, for those watching out there, all votes, as have been the case in a lot of these Zoom meetings, will be by roll call vote. So Clerk Semino, can we have a roll call to open the meeting?
Councilor Ringus.
Here.
Councilor Sasha.
Here.
Councilor Flaherty.
Here.
Councilor Mackin.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. At this juncture, we have no minutes to approve. So we'll be moving on to old business, which is 00220, Council President, Town Council rules or taking up any action relative thereto. Do I have a motion to take item 00220 off the table?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilor Sasha. I have a second by Councilor Flaherty. Clerk Semino, can we have a roll call vote?
Councilor Ringus.
Aye.
Councilor Sasha.
Yes.
Councilor Flaherty.
Yes.
Councilor Mackin.
Aye.
4 in favor.
And that is unanimous, so the motion passes. So again, for those watching at home, which just take a quick peek, we have a couple of people watching. We have been going over, as this Committee on Ordinance and Rules, these council rules for a series of months now, dating back to prior to the onset of the COVID-19 crisis. Again, I've said this a bunch of times at these meetings, but again, if it's your first time tuning in, the council rules are the rules with which the town council operates and runs their meetings. So they are inherently important, although again, not the most exciting thing that we sort of debate. I am very appreciative of where we are at this point to Councilor Flaherty, Councilor Sasha, Councilor Mackin, and of course, Clerk Semino, who's had to sit through all these meetings. We did approve this by a 4-0 vote to go back to the full council. At our last full council meeting, there was some amendments that were presented by various councilors. And there was a decision to send it back to the Committee on Ordinance and Rules for further discussion on some of those amendments. Last week, we had conducted 2 meetings. We had Councilor Boarica, our District 5 councilor, come in and talk about some amendments that she was proposing, as well as Councilor Sasha. And then on Wednesday, a meeting that I had to leave early, and I understand went a little bit longer after I left. We had Councilor O'Brien present some modifications that he might see. We've also discussed a little bit. It wasn't, I guess, a full amendment proposal, but there was some discussion at the full council on the amount of expenditure each councilor might be able to take, and that's something we had voted initially to lower, and we've discussed a little bit here. So tonight, my hope is that in discussing this, that we can listen. This has been a labor of love, I guess, for all of us. But my hope is that we can sort of wrap it up tonight and get it back to the full council. I have spoken to Clerk Semino. My feeling tonight is at the full council meeting, if indeed we do push this forward, hopefully with a vote tonight, that I would move to table it at the full council meeting. Clerk Semino will then be able to take all the adjustments that have been made, put them into sort of a neater, more organized fashion so that all the councilors can review it, and then we can come back and discuss it at the next meeting. So that is, I guess, the hope that we can get it referred tonight. So with that said, there was some discussion after I left the other night. Clerk Semino has put together sort of a discussion point Word document for us to sort of go through, which thank you, Clerk Semino, for doing that. So I didn't know if any of the councilors wanted to jump in and address any of this off the bat, or how we wanted to start. So I guess I will open the floor to any of the councilors who wanted to speak on any of the items that we are still working on. Okay, so seeing none. All right, so I'll take it. All right, so I guess one of the pieces, and Clerk Semino, you can correct me because I'm kind of working a little bit off of your write-up here. Rule 4. Is there a way that you could share Rule 4 on your screen, Clerk Semino?
Sure. 1 second. Sorry, 1 second.
Take your time.
I don't know what's happening tonight.
That's all right. We can
I'll keep
jump.
trying.
You keep trying. I'll. Oh, looks like you're doing it.
Oh, that is not the one we wanted.
Okay. Well, I think Rule 4 is relatively easy, so we can, while you work on that, we can address Rule 4.
So if I may,
Can you
Good.
see my screen? Can you? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Bill says, it
You
says
can
there are
see
no
it, but it's
calls
short now.
It's on pause. That's weird. Okey-dokey.
While you work on that, I'll just continue.
Okay.
So Rule 4 was this to the substitute chair. We spoke on this a little bit with, here we go, with Councilor O'Brien. He had some questions about it. I think we were able to describe what Rule 4 is in regards to. And unless someone has anything different they wanted to add, I think Rule 4, we were pretty much on board with keeping as is. If anyone wanted to weigh in on that differently, but I think we expressed what we thought it to mean or what it does mean. And I think even Councilor O'Brien agreed that he understood what it meant now. So with that said, does any councilor have any issues with Rule 4, or are we just going to leave it as is? See, I see seeing no one raising their hand at this point. And if your raise hand function has an issue, you can always just yell out. But Rule 4, it looks like we'll leave it that is. So we did address that, and we're moving on from it. Going to Rule 30. Which is right now says hearings. And this is, we had discussed the idea of adding to the word public hearings. Because basically and we've done a lot on sort of addressing some of the headings to make sure that through our work here that the headings match what the rule is actually describing, because there were some issues with that in the past. So this is the time devoted to public hearings at any meeting of the council. So there was discussion about adding the word in. It will now read Rule 30 public hearings. Are there any issues from any of the councilors with that?
no,
All right, so seeing none, Rule 30 will now read as public hearings. Also on Rule 30, there was some discussion about majority versus 2/3, and that is specifically to the part that's sort of in bold right now. Additional time may be granted at the discretion of the council president or chairperson, that means who was ever chairing the meeting, or by a vote of the council after motion by any councilor. Now, we had discussed a majority vote, we had discussed a 2/3 vote. I think at the last meeting, there was some discussion that we wanted to change that back to a majority vote instead of a 2/3 vote. So it would be a 5-4 vote would be needed. Unless there's anything different, does any councilor want to weigh in on that? Seeing no hands so I can only see Councilor Mackin's face on my screen. So I keep seeing him shake his head. But at this point, if seeing no one raising their hands, we want to move that back to majority.
Yeah.
yes,
Hearing no objections, Clerk Semino, Rule 30 will now read public hearings. And that red line will move back to a majority vote of the council as opposed to a 2/3 vote of the council.
Chairman Ringus,
Councilor Shasha.
I'm just noticing as we go through this, I definitely support the majority. I'm looking at this and thinking this applies to committee hearings as well, in which case we might need to change the language of that last sentence to majority vote of the council or committee. Well, actually, this doesn't address committees.
This is more to, this is as to public hearings of the full council.
Okay,
So I think council would be the accurate phrase terminology there. If there's no further discussion on that. Okay. Before we get into some of the, I guess we'll say are the funkier ones, so they are going to cause a little more discussion. I think at first, if we moved to Rule 37. Rule 37 is as to the standing committees. There was some discussion about ways and means. So every subcommittee that you see listed here is either made up of 3 or 4 members when you look at ordinance and rules being a 4-member committee. Ways and means, and again, we've had some discussion about this in our own meetings here. It says 4 to 5. And that is, from a personal perspective, even before my time on the council, I think I've noted that I thought 5 was too many because it basically creates a quorum. But I think from my understanding of my notes, we all were kind of on that page, but we didn't feel like the right way to address it at this time was by shortening it here, especially since the Ways and Means Committee has already been formulated for this session. And in essence, that would thus mean somebody was getting knocked off of it. So I believe the general consensus is we do not want to change the language now. Again, these things can always be changed by a motion of the council. Really at any point. I think our sort of discussion centered around leaving it in the 4 to 5 member capacity, unless any other counselor wants to correct me on that. Seeing no hands raised, Clerk Semino, we will keep Rule 37 Ways and Means to consist of 4 to 5 members.
Got it.
Okay. Moving on to Rule 42, committee reports. So there's some language that is redlined right now, which is specifically annually or biannually at the discretion of the chair, which would be the chair of the subcommittee. All committees shall provide a report to the full council summarizing the result of the committee's meetings. I had suggested at the last meeting that we held, which was on Wednesday, and I ended up cutting out, I had to cut out early for another event. I had possibly suggested cutting out at the discretion of the chair and making it mandatory. And I believe there may have been some discussion after I got off. I don't know if anybody wanted to touch base on this sentence about whether we keep it at the discretion of the chair or we make it a mandatory thing.
I think our discussion was whether about the annually or biannually being at the discretion of the chair. I do think we should just have a mandatory report get submitted and move on.
Okay. Councillor Shasha or Councillor Flaherty?
yes, Chairman Rengus.
Councillor Shasha.
I think I agree that I think we were reading that as the well, first of all, I think we had suggested moving this to a separate line from the first one for every committee of the council because they are 2 separate things. One was for reports being sent back for things referred to the committee, and this is kind of a separate item for an annual report.
Okay.
And I agree that we all wanted it to be mandatory, and it was just more about the language. The at discretion of, we thought, said that annually or biannually is at the discretion of, not the report itself.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I would add maybe one more thing here in that while the report should be mandatory, if we're going to leave anything up to discretion, maybe we could just say at least annually. Because I'm thinking for a committee like this, right now might be a good time to produce a report after we finish these rules, because we will have come to something of a stopping point. And we might not want to wait until the end of the year, but we've already passed the semi-annual mark. So maybe a little bit more flexibility there. And
Okay.
I also have a question if we want this to apply to every committee, because something like personnel, which only meets on demand, might not have anything to report.
Okay, okay. Councilor Flaherty, anything to add before we address some of those points?
No, I agree with that. It is concerning that some of the committees wouldn't have anything necessarily to report if they have not been called upon to meet. And yeah, that's it.
Okay. So it seems like, again, I guess our sort of discussion here is, I think that it might make sense to just define out annually or biannually and just call it as is. I think, like Councilor Mackin said, it might make it easier. I think some of these meetings, some of these committees, it's a larger report for maybe a committee like ours or a committee like Ways and Means that meet a little more often. So, and I would defer a little bit here, also seek the opinion of Clerk Semino, but I think perhaps saying biannually, the all committees shall provide a report to the full council summarizing the results of the committee meetings, unless anyone wants to change that at all. Everyone okay with that?
So I did raise my hand, but I think because I
Yes,
wasn't.
I think it's not showing, so just yell out if you need to. So
Okay.
Councilor Flaherty.
So one suggestion to contend with this problem is to assign the president the role of determining when it's time for a committee to present a report to the full council.
That it's a possibility. We could change the language to add in that the president does it. Councilor Mackin or Councilor Shasha, what's your feelings on this?
I would hope the committee heads, just everyone, it's pretty clear, just file the report, I don't think we need to put in specifically
Okay.
the president has to tell us to do it.
Councilor Shasha, anything on that?
I would agree with that. I think it's just simpler to do. And back to my earlier point, I think simpler is better. We can have every committee do this, and there might be some committees that just submit a report that says we not have to meet this year.
Yeah. All right. So I would say if everyone's okay with it, again, I do agree with you as well. I think adding a role to the president isn't necessarily needed here. I think the chairperson of each committee knows they have a role to fulfill. So I would say my proposal would be that we say on a biannual basis, all committees shall provide a report to the full council summarizing the results of the committee's meetings. Everyone okay with that?
Yes.
Councilor Flaherty?
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Clerk Semino, so we'll read on a Rule 42 will now read, on a biannual basis, all committees shall provide a report to the full council summarizing results of the committee's meetings.
So taking out at the discretion of the chair.
At the discretion of the chair, and annually, we're just going to make it biannually.
And for what it's worth, the apostrophe should be removed from committees because it's not possessive.
100% accurate, correct. So with that said, if Clerk Semino is okay with that, moving on to Rule 49, Town Auditor, we had some discussion on this. So we had discussed at our meetings adding in the last two sentences, which are on this the screen that Clerk Semino is showing us has a line through it. We had added in, this request shall be in writing and approved by the council president. If rejected by the council president, it may be voted on the next council meeting and require 2/3 vote of the council. We had added that in, but then we had discussion about perhaps taking it out, which is why we have it lined out right now. Did anyone want to speak on this?
I agree with keeping it, taking it out.
Taking it out. Councilor Shasha?
I agree as well. It just complicates things needlessly.
Okay. Councilor Flaherty?
You're on mute, Councilor Flaherty.
Darn it. Kids are having dinner behind me. I'm trying to be quiet for you. Okay, so as long as everybody's fine with the idea that any counselor can, we were concerned before that you could have a counselor who was making requests to the auditor to check things, and the full council would, and that would eat up the auditor's budget. And that's the reason why we consider why that portion is in there, because it's meant to be a control on how the budget gets used, so that one person doesn't submit 35 projects to the auditor and soak up the whole budget so that nobody else can use it. That's why it's there.
Correct.
Removing
And I
it is
agree.
fine as long as everybody makes sensible requests of the auditor.
Correct. And
But
I
if you
think,
don't leave it there, it's unchecked.
I think we had added it in on the idea of thinking of this hypothetical faceless future council, that we wouldn't want to see something like that happen. It hasn't happened. I think Clerk Semino has said that. And we didn't want to, I think like Councilor Bryan sort of mentioned, we don't want to make it that none of us can approach to ask for some sort of report or some sort of, reach out at all, because it could create the reverse of what we wanted, where no one can reach out, or then now you're going through an approval process. So I think it's something to monitor for the future. And if we ever saw that happening where someone is eating up the budget, perhaps we readdress it. But I think it's worked thus far. And the town auditor is an employee of the full council, so I don't want to limit that. So although I agreed with initially when we met kind of live pre-COVID of adding these two sentences in, I think in sort of re-looking at it over these months, I do think that maybe we should take it out and kind of always look to it in the future if need be.
Okay.
Everyone all right with that?
Chairman Ringus?
Councilor Shasha?
I just wanted to add that if we adopt the rule about having ongoing reporting of all council expenditures, we will be keeping tabs on that. And if the auditor's budget is, looking like it's going to be a problem, then we can address it if it is.
Yep, I agree. So
But we would have no means to address it.
Councilor Flaherty, did you want to respond?
There would just be no means to address it. Like if we wanted to address it, I don't know what we have in place to be able to do so.
Well, we always have the ability, if needed, to these rules can be amended at any time. We could always file it. We could always send it back and amend it. So, I mean, if we saw it being an issue, again, it's never been an issue. And like I said, it's a weird one. It's a gray area. I supported putting it in. Retrospectively, I now support sort of taking it out. So, I mean, I'm okay with taking it out and kind of seeing how things go. And I think with the expenditures, it'll give us sort of reports, which we'll address in a little bit. I think it does give you a way to keep an eye on it.
Okay, well, considering it has not been a problem in the past,
Okay.
I'm willing for it to be removed.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Clerk Semino, we will take those two sentences out. Moving on to Rule 53, Counselor Citizen Sidebar.
Rule 53.
This is about, again, we said it doesn't happen a lot. I think in my now 3 years on the council, I've done it once where I walked away from the council table to address someone in the crowd. This is if someone desires to speak to a member of the council when ongoing. So it might be that the person is there to say something. Maybe they're uncomfortable speaking. Maybe they're going to get a message to you that you're going to deliver as the counselor for that person. It basically just gives you the sort of the protocol that you'll retire to the rear of the council chamber until the conversation is finished. I believe it was Councilor O'Brien when he addressed us. He felt it wasn't necessary and that we don't need to be told how to basically regulate ourselves. This isn't a rule that we put in. This is a rule that's existed. I think it's a good protocol rule to have, but I would be open to listening to other counselors' feelings on this. Anyone wish to talk about this?
Chairman Ringus?
Counselor Shasha.
I would just say that as a new counselor and a lot of new counselors, we might not know what the protocol is, say in Robert's rules for this kind of thing. So there's certainly no harm in keeping it in here, just as a reminder that there is a protocol to this and everybody should follow it.
Okay. Any other counselors wanted to touch base on that?
I share Counselor Shasha's point of view on that. I think that if it was telling us something not to do, then I could understand the objection somewhat more. But because it's just telling you how to do something, I feel fine leaving it the way it is.
Okay. Counselor Mackin, anything to add on that?
No, fine with me.
All right. So with that said, we will leave that rule intact. Moving on to Rule 56, communications from mayor. I believe that we had added in the word business, but was there some sort of question on this? I don't remember what the question was, and if it was one of us, please feel free to pipe in.
I feel like we talked about taking it out, but that could just be me. I might be confusing it with a different one.
Taking out the rule entirely or taking out the word business?
I thought just the entire thing, but again, I could be wrong there.
Chairman Ringus?
Councilor Shaw?
My recollection is the same. We realized a lot of the communications from the mayor are not things that we're going to see 2 days ahead of time. They're updates on COVID and things like that. There's no need for the mayor to get those to the council 2 days ahead of time. The whole point is to have, up to the minute information from department heads. And this kind of seems misguided.
It would hold him back from releasing new information. Okay. I'm fine. I have no issue with removing Rule 56. Councilor Flaherty, did you want to weigh in on that at all?
In the conversation, what we were considering was we'd like for the mayor not to provide us with a load of information at the very last minute, because that creates a problem when you're asked to, you can't read it and vote on it at the same time, or react to it and ask questions appropriately a lot of the time at the same time when it's a lot of material. On the other hand, nobody wants to create a situation where the mayor can't give us updates because of a rule that says you have to give it 2 days in advance. Sometimes things are timely and stuff changes really fast. So we thought, taking it out, while it would fully permit the mayor's office to, create, and hand us what you could call a document dump, it still might be better than limiting the power of the mayor to inform us with material.
Yeah, and I agree. When you look at it that way, I think it is, especially when we're in the age that we're living in COVID, with things changing at the last second. Sometimes there are going to be communications we don't want held back because of a two-day thing. And obviously, this isn't talking about agenda items. This is straight communications. So I agree. So if there's no further discussion on that, we would remove Rule 56 from the rules.
Yeah, and same thing, I think, with Rule 57. I think we came to the concession that was just kind of weird and unnecessary.
All right, so moving on to Rule 57, which is right below it, council expression. The council president or vice president is authorized to convey the expression of interest shown by the council on all occasions affecting its members and their families. I think this was kind of in here for, I think sometimes announcing, somebody had a grandchild, somebody had a child, something like that. It may be one of those rules. I mean, there's nothing to prevent us from saying congratulations, Councilor Mackin, on your grandchild.
Right, but I don't think that's necessary as a rule. That's just
yes, I agree. There's no need to have a rule defining it if that's the will of the subcommittee. Councilor Shasha, anything on that?
I agree. It can be removed.
And Councilor Flaherty?
I think it can be removed. I think matters of custom don't necessarily need to be identified in the rules.
Okay, Clerk Semino, we will take out Rule 57. All right, so this is one that I think we've discussed a bit, this is one of the ones that there may be further discussion at the council, and we're cognizant of the fact that may happen. Rule 65, travel conference reimbursement policy. It had for years been 2,500. We had discussed, again, this is something that we were able to discuss live pre-COVID, had discussed going to 1,000. We brought this up at the full council. There was two councilors who didn't want to see it lowered. And I believe the councilor Brian appeared before us and talked a little bit about this. I think in our discussions, and I don't want to speak for anyone, that we decided based on where we stand now with looking to the budget of the future, knowing that there are people out of work, that there are businesses failing, and that the state is operating on a 1/12 type budget, and we don't know what the future is going to look like totally with revenues, that it makes sense for us to at least ceremonially cut this to 1,000. So my feeling is to take that 2,500 and cut it to 1,000 per counselor. And I don't know if any of the other counselors want to weigh in on that.
I think we all agreed on this last time.
But, all right, and that was my understanding as well. So Counselor Flaherty, were you starting to speak?
Only to say, we discussed this, we are in agreement.
Okay.
It's fine.
$1,000. Okay. And again, if there's councilors that want to address it at the full council, that is their right, but we can move it forward from our subcommittee. We discussed this a little bit last time. Rule 66, council expenditures. A running list of all expenditures of funds for the year by the council will be published to the town website regularly, and the list shall be updated within 30 days of the approval of the expenditures. I believe this was initially called Rule A. It was put forward by Councilor Shasha, I believe. And I believe we did discuss it, and we were all on board, and we had Clerk Semino weigh in that this would not be an undue burden on her. If anyone else wanted to add in, please do. All right, seeing none, then we will call this Rule 66 and add it to the rules after Rule 65.
Chairman Ringus?
Clerk, I think that was Clerk Semino. Clerk
Yes.
Semino.
I just wanted to, through the chair, ask Councilor Sasha, the title, was it going to be council expenditure reports or just council expenditures? I have two different ones here, so I wasn't sure which one we went with.
You're right. I think in my note here, sorry, I hadn't turned the page. I think we said council expenditure reports. Councilor Shash, does that seem accurate?
Yes, I believe that's more accurate.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
We discussed this last time as well. Rule B. This was also proposed by Councilor Shasha. So this there was some discussion of moving this to Rule 20.
Chairman Ringus,
Councilor Shasha.
before we proceed with this, so if I'm understanding the email that we received from Solicitor Taub on this, we would actually not be able to open a public comment period if it's not on the agenda, because it could violate open meeting laws.
Correct.
So this rule. I have some other things I'd like to propose instead, but we can hold those until the end. I don't think that Rule B, as it's written in here, will work.
Okay, so we'll hold off on that for now. Moving on to the next thing, which is renaming Rule 37, I believe. Oh, maybe I'm wrong on that.
Oh, see, excuse me, sorry. Chairman Ringus, we were going to rename Rule C to Rule 37, distribution of council correspondence.
And then standing committees would become Rule 38.
Sure.
So everything would get knocked down. So it would go Rule 36 would be anonymous communications. Rule 37 would be distribution of council correspondence. And so then everything else would bump down one. Just let me quickly read this over. Yes, we discussed this at the last meeting. Does anyone have anything they wanted to add on this?
Chairman Ringus?
Councilor Shasha.
I just wanted to, a couple of the counselors said that 48 hours might not be enough if you don't check your email frequently enough. So better periods of time might be 5 business days for electronic communications and 10 business days for all other communications.
I have no issue with that. Does any other counselor want to weigh in?
Nope.
All right, so saying that, Clerk Semino, we will make this Rule 37, distribution of council correspondence. We will amend what's been written as from 48 hours to 5 business days if received electronically, and 10 days. Do we want that to be 10 days or 10 business days if received in any other form?
I think we've been using business days everywhere else.
Right, so 10 business days. That sound right to all the councilors sitting here?
Yes.
Okay, so Clerk Semino, we will make those amendments.
Chairman Ringus,
Clerk Semino.
there was one other amendment to that. The last sentence was going to say council member will forward to the clerk of the council for distribution.
Okay, I have no issue with that. Everyone okay, else okay with that as well? That makes sense. That's the way it's supposed to work. So, and that would also avoid us violating any open meeting laws.
Mhm.
Okay, seeing no issues with that, we will add in that last sentence. So after if received in any other form, it will now add an additional sentence. Council member will forward to the clerk of the council for distribution. But the next thing gets these got a little tricky. And this comes off of Councilor O'Brien's presentation to us. We had done some work, again, pre-COVID, on Rule 33 and Rule 34. We had sort of separated them out into Rule 33 and Rule 34, which is agenda requests from other town departments and agenda requests from council members. Councilor O'Brien had also proposed Rule D, which in a way sort of interacts and or possibly supersedes Rule 33 and Rule 34. There was a lot of discussion on this. It was, I think, Councilor Flaherty, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you said what we all thought, that this was kind of very wordy, and that we were trying to make this as plain language as possible. I believe that we had sort of tabled this to discuss tonight. From reading off of Clerk Semino's notes, which again, I thank you for, Clerk Semino. She notes that Rule 33 and 34 contain similar information. We liked the separating of requirements from mayor and departments and council members. There was some issues possibly with paragraph B. So did anyone want to take the lead on discussion of the interaction between 33, 34, 56 in this new proposed Rule D? Councilor Mackin.
I mean, I remembered a couple things about this one. First of all, so Rule D, the Part A, from however on down, we said we were taking that whole thing out. Also, the Part D, I think we said we were axing that whole thing. I'm just trying to make this a little less bulky to look at. So
correct. I think we had said it was just very wordy.
Right, because honestly, just trying to figure out how this relates, we just get lost with all these extra words.
Yeah.
So that's just somewhere we could start real quick. As to how it relates to the other two, there is a lot of overlap there in 33 and 34. I mean, both 33 and 34 have 10 a.m. on Thursday as the deadline, like whether it's for councils or for other town departments. So, I mean, we could theoretically just consolidate everything together and say it's all going to be whatever this date.
Okay. Councilor Shasha or Councilor Flaherty, do you guys want to add anything in here?
Yes.
So-
Go ahead.
Counselor, I heard Counselor Shasha first.
Oh, thank you, Chairman Ringus. I spent a good bit of time this weekend looking at this, trying to figure out how to integrate this with the rules that are already in there. And first, one of the things we discussed last week was that this really should only apply to agenda items from the mayor's office. I feel strongly about not doing anything to limit anything put forward by a counselor or a resident. One of the things that Councillor O'Brien was trying to accomplish here was to force this to be in effect by putting a penalty in it, that if amendments were proposed after the date, it would reset the clock and it would not be heard by the council. We've taken that out. And I think once you take that out, I'm not sure that this is saying anything different than what the earlier rules 33 through 36 already state, which is that an agenda item has to be filed. In this case, we have 5 days, but that would be Thursday as well.
Yeah.
Right. And we're saying it should be complete, but if it's not complete, there's nothing in here that we're going to do anything about it, which is essentially what we have now. We have everything's due on Thursday, but things can be amended or updated after the fact.
Okay. Councilor Flaherty, anything to add on that?
I was going to point out that I think another thing he's trying to accomplish is for all the information to have to be provided. I think that Councillor O'Brien has seen many, many times situations where he was asked to act on a measure for which he did not have all the information necessary until kind of the last possible second. And so although he agrees, and I agree with him on this, that we haven't really seen that issue in this particular council. It has been much better, but he remembers when it has been a problem. And of course, if it's been a problem before, it can be a problem again. So I think that's why he has this no measure shall be pre-filed without the complete measure, including all supporting documentation. The problem is partly, just like Councillor Shasha said, we've taken out the consequence if it's not. And the other problem is that there's how do you decide, what the complete measure, what constitutes complete?
Yeah.
So it seems like this is an idea that is trying to address a problem that deserves to be addressed. I just don't know that this particular effort works for it, and I haven't found a solution myself.
Okay. I think looking, if I could break it down by paragraph, and just my own thoughts here, I think D is about the author of pre-filed measure withdrawing it at any time. I think that's sort of common knowledge that anybody who introduces something can always pull it back. So it just adds words that I don't necessarily think have to necessarily be there. C is the author of a pre-filed measure may amend the measure at any time. Again, even at a council meeting, something can be amended. We have the right to amend stuff. So again, is it just extra words that don't need to be there? I do like B, but I think Councilor Flaherty, you sort of hit the nail on the head. How do you determine what is complete? I think we're trying to address what, again, like I said, and he noted the mayor's office has not been doing this lately. And obviously some of these things are opinions about whether it was or wasn't done and when people sat on the council or didn't sit on the council. And I said at the outset of when we started this back months ago that, you always sort of look at these rules in a faceless way. So could it happen in a future administration or whatever? So I think there is something to be said for having B, but I think, like I said, you hit the nail on the head. How do you, what is the enforcement and how do you determine what completeness is, As to A, I think Councilor Mackin sort of addressed this, and maybe Councilor Shasha, I think you touched on it as well. Thursday is 5 days, so I don't think we need that. So, and I also agree, and this is just my personal opinions, I agree with Councilor Shasha that we don't want to be limiting what council members try to introduce. So I think Rule 34 should stand with the Thursday date as we proposed it. Rule 33, if we wanted to try to, because this is about mayor and from the mayor and other departments, if we wanted to try to craft some language, maybe using that B about making sure that things have supporting documentation included. So perhaps in looking at the way Rule 33 is written now, agenda requests from other town departments, you know, it reads all items of the agenda, including communication reports in the mayor's town offices, town boards, shall be submitted no later than 10 a.m. on Thursday, preceding the council meeting. A copy of, Councilor Mackin.
Yeah, Councilor, sorry to cut you off there. I just thought of this. So Rule 33 was already on there, right?
Yes, I think.
Okay, so we already, it says mayor's office, so there was already a rule that we shouldn't be getting document dumps looking at this.
Correct.
It just
Yeah.
doesn't get followed.
Yeah.
So it's not a question of adding this into the rules. It's just a question of making sure it actually, so, I mean, we could add Councilor O'Brien's rule now, and I get what he's trying to address. But there has to be some method of following through on it as well.
Well, I think the method of following through is the council standing strong and saying if something like this happens, that we're just not going to hear it. I think we have the rule here to enforce it. If we wanted to sort of just add some words, we could add at the end here. No measure shall be pre-filed without all supporting documentation. But I mean, other than that, I think the rule exists, and it's just a matter of us saying, well, no, you didn't abide by our rules, so we're not going to hear this tonight.
Yeah, so I agree. I mean, we could add in a bit about the documentation into 33, tighten that up, and then that's probably good.
And again, there is language in Rule 33 that we could always hear late items, but they require a 2/3 vote of the council. So I would propose that the way it reads now towards the end, it says a copy of said reports and agenda shall be delivered to the council no later preceding the regular council meeting. We could add in, if we wanted, right after meeting, but before the word late, no measure shall be filed without all supporting documentation. And then continue late items require. Did anyone want to weigh in on that?
I think that that's a sound addition.
Okay, Councilor Shasha?
Sorry, I agree with that.
Okay, Councilor Mackin, you okay with just adding that word in there, those words in there? You okay with that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry. All right, so Clerk Semino, after regular council meeting, we'll add in sentence, all measures will be filed, including all supporting documentation.
Oh, that's not what you said before.
Or what did I say before? How did I word it before?
Sorry. I have
No,
I have it written that you said after the word meeting and before the
Yep.
word late.
Okay,
No measure shall be pre-filed without all supporting documentation. Feel
Okay.
free to amend.
sounds good to me. I'm getting older. I like it. I sounded better the first time, so we'll keep that. All right. So that addresses all of Rule D. And that addresses Rule 33 and Rule 34. We've addressed D. We already have the line stating 2/3 vote. So 33 is all set, 34 is all set. All right, so then I guess what we are left with is Rule 35. And there was and this was a proposal by Council Borico, who appeared last Monday with us. A week last Monday. And then this also, I believe, ties in similarly to proposal B from Councilor Shasha. And we've gotten various opinions from Solicitor Chief of Staff Taub on how these things coincide with open meeting law. Sort of the basic opinion being that some of this language we're dancing dangerously close to the line on the possibility of violating open meeting law, and we don't want to do that, obviously. But I believe Council Shasha, you said a couple moments ago that you had some proposals.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Ringus. Yes, it is frustrating that as we try to allow the public to participate more, it would be in violation of the open meeting law, which seems counterintuitive, but I've read what Solicitor Taub said and it made sense. So I had two things that I wanted to propose. One was actually Councillor Flaherty's idea, but in the absence of allowing a full public comment period, there are two things that I think might help. The first would be to add to Rule 42, which is committee reports, a line saying that committee reports may include instructions to the council president and clerk of the council to include a public comment period or public hearing for the agenda item being reported back to the council. So that way, so in this example, we're sending these rules back to the council. We could include with our report a recommendation that we have a public comment period on the rules before we take a vote.
And I think, okay, I see what you're saying. That makes sense. And I think if it's on the agenda for a public comment period, then we, on that specific issue, then we avoid any sort of interaction with open meeting law, because we would be pre-announcing it, that there would be an open comment period on it. Does any other councilor wish to sort of flesh that out a little bit?
Yes, I discussed.
Clarity.
Thank you. I discussed this idea with Solicitor Taub because, you know, as we all have said, this council would like to open up some opportunities for people to be able to more readily participate in council meetings and express themselves there in the meeting. And the idea of having a committee recommend a public hearing for any given item that the committee has reviewed made some sense to me, because there would be some planning involved. But two things, I was reminded of a couple of things. One is committees often meet right before the full council, like we're doing right now. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, then the public hearing still wouldn't be on the agenda. So Solicitor Taub strongly cautioned me not to go down that road because of the likelihood that we'd wind up opening a public hearing at a time when we have not put a public hearing on the agenda. Now, if we can do the rule in such a way that committees that meet far enough in advance can make that recommendation, then we could avoid that. But that's a thing to, I mean, that is in practice not often how we operate, although sometimes it's how we operate.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Shasha or Councilor Mackin, do you want to weigh in on that?
Well, Chairman Ringus, I think that this is just sending the report back with instructions to include on the agenda item. It's not adding anything to the agenda. It's not modifying the agenda. So
no, I think what Councilor Flaherty was saying, and what Solicitor Taub, when she was giving her opinion to Councilor Flaherty, was saying is, like, theoretically tonight, hopefully in a couple minutes, we're going to take a vote on this and we're going to refer it back to the full council with a positive vote. And like I said, we're going to end up probably tabling this so the council can review it. But sometimes O&R or Ways and Means or DPW we meet the night of the meeting, and then we're referring it back to be heard at that meeting that night. So it wouldn't be appearing on the agenda because the agenda already would have been out. I think that's what she was saying.
Right, and I would agree with that, but this is not saying that it has to be open to a public hearing. It's just saying that we may include a recommendation to include a public hearing or public comment period.
So in essence, though, we'd all have to recognize that if it was like this and there wasn't a chance to get on the agenda, that we might not be able to do that. That would only be if we had the time to have the stacked out far enough in advance.
Yes, agreed. But even in a case like this, we could still put it forward with a recommendation. And it's possible that counselors would say, okay, let's table it because the committee thinks that there should be a public hearing on this. Let's table it for 2 weeks so we can have a public hearing.
Okay. I that makes sense. Councilor Flaherty, do you want to respond to that? Because I think you were on board with this idea. It was just you're worried, like we all are, about implicating open meeting law.
Right. It's really just open meeting law that gives me pause.
Correct.
As long as the concerns about open meeting law are met, then it's not an issue. I don't know. When I was discussing it, I was thinking about whether the recommendation, I don't know how you have a binding recommendation, right? But I don't know whether the recommendation would be a requirement or a recommendation that the president would be free to agree or disagree with.
And then if I could, the only other thing that it might implicate too is sometimes we have items that have to be acted on by sort of a date certain. So then if a committee recommends something to have a public comment period, and again, I'm open to public comment periods. I like when there's public comment periods. I was a huge fan of public comment periods at the school committee meeting, and I always sought when I was there to ensure that we had it. So I think the public should be able to comment, but we run into open meeting law obligations and not wanting to violate that. So I just pause, Councilor Shasha, knowing that sometimes, like what would be the ramifications if we had something that couldn't be tabled or kicked out 2 weeks, but the committee had recommended a public comment period on that.
Well, I'm not sure that there would be any implications because a recommendation is just a recommendation, right? I mean, we can recommend approval of a bylaw, but that doesn't mean the council has to vote for it.
Okay. All right.
It certainly would make sense to run this by Solicitor Taub, but given that we're probably not voting on this for 2 weeks, there would be time to do that.
Okay. So just as I see that it is getting to the 7 o'clock hour, and we're running up, obviously our meeting is starting at 7:30. Did we want to just briefly pause on that and sort of address, because it ties in? Do we want to address 35 at all, which is Council Boericke's adjustments? Again, with note that there's sort of implications of open meeting law here.
I think the same principle applies to both Rule 35 as suggested by Councilor Boericke and also Rule B as suggested by Councilor Shasha. We have asked now Solicitor Taub twice, once with the idea initially, and a second time where we specified that that either item would be related to an agenda item. And in both cases, she told us that it was likely to run into an open meeting violation. And so I think this is one that we just can't adopt because of that.
So, Clerk Semino, if I could turn to you for a second,
Mhm.
because there's been so many amendments and discussions regarding this. And I just don't have my other computer up right now. What was this rule prior to all the redlining and whatnot? Do we know what Rule 35, did Rule 35 citizen participation at council meetings exist prior to us jumping in here?
It did. I actually, if you go to page 2 of the discussion points that I typed out, that's the original. Rule 35 on the top of that page.
Okay, thank you.
And I will double check that also.
This was the original rule. Okay, I just didn't boot up my other computer right now. So obviously, Rule 35 as written on, does everyone have the comments from Clerk Semino?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So that last paragraph that begins the agenda and ends in a calendar year, we already moved that to Rule 32. So we're just addressing this first paragraph. That's how it currently stands. So starting with individuals and ending with regular council meeting. I know that isn't perfect. And we do have 2 weeks because we're going to move to table tonight. I think what might make some sense is if we move forward with leaving we make our recommendation with Rule 35 as is. Obviously, when this gets to the full council after they read the cleaned up version that Clerk Semino puts forward, we've already discussed that 2 councilors may sort of have some pushback on that $2,500, $1,000 mark. It doesn't mean that things can't be changed. It doesn't mean that a councilor who wants to sort of address Rule 35 more and maybe seek some further opinions from Solicitor Taub or the AG's office or whomever they want to speak to. It doesn't mean that they can't in the next 2 weeks. So it might make sense from my perspective to keep Rule 35 with that one paragraph as it is, and we can see what folks come up with in the next 2 weeks.
Chairman Ringus, if I may.
Councilor Flaherty?
At the very least, we should change it from Wednesday to Thursday to align with all the other changes from Wednesday to Thursday that we've made.
I would agree with you. Any other councilors want to weigh in on that?
I would agree with that.
Okay, Councilor Mackin?
Yeah, I agree.
So basically now Rule 35 will, and obviously noting that Councilor Shasha is still kind of working some things out here and possibly gonna come back with something new for the full council, and perhaps Councilor Borica will continue to kind of work it as well. We'll leave Rule 35 or with slight changes that second paragraph is removed. Rule 35 will read citizen participation at council meetings. It will start with individuals requesting time. It'll end with regular council meeting with the change from Wednesday to Thursday. Is everyone on board with that? Councilor Shasha, you okay with that?
Yes.
Councilor Flaherty?
Yes.
Councilor Mackin?
Yes.
All right. I'm feeling good because we are close. So I think we've addressed a lot. We made a lot of changes the last 2 meetings. So just really quick, not to belabor anything, but before we take a vote, I'll just kind of briefly buying through these. So Rule 1, I don't think we have any issues with. Rule 2, which is kind of the limitations on the president, I don't think we have any issues with. Rule 3, was appeals from the decisions of the president. Rule 4 is substitute chair. Rule 5 is via voca and rising votes. 6 is seating arrangements. 7 is admission to the council floor. 8 is committees to appointments. Now, on committee appointments, we did address something that we added, just because I'm noting it's in red, that committee appointments is one of the powers that we kind of grant the president. The council president shall appoint all members of all committees of the town council, whether special or standing. We had added in the piece to in the meetings pre-COVID, because I remember we did this up in the Johnson chambers. Appointments are subject to Rule 3, appeals from the decision of the president. We had added that in. It hadn't existed prior. It wasn't listed prior, so we specifically noted it. Was that still something that everybody wanted to have in there, or did anyone want to address that?
Chairman Ringus, if
Councilor
I have
Flaherty?
thought that.
Sure.
You know, I guess the concern that I have is that it significantly reduces the amount of power that the president wields in the council. Because either the president decides the committee appointments or the president does not decide the committee appointments. If, you know, it's really easy to imagine a scenario where, like, I don't know, maybe the comprehensive zoning update is looming and everybody wants to be on ordinance and rules, or nobody wants to be on ordinance and rules because they don't want to deal with that.
Right.
And if you have a president whose decision concerning a committee appointment is not binding, then, you know, it's really the council nominating and confirming. And it's really easy to imagine it becoming kind of a circus.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment on that? Councilor Shasha or Councilor Mackin?
Well, Chairman Rings, I think if I recall correctly, we had determined earlier that that the committee appointments were always subject to appeal. It just wasn't spelled out in the rules. And it's always better to have something clarified than have to wonder if something applies or not. So this would not be limiting the power of the president, but just clarifying that.
Okay. Councilor Mackin?
Yeah, I guess I agree with Councilor Sasha, because above it says president decisions are subject to appeal. So this is a decision. And I think that's what we landed on when we originally put that in.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. I'm sorry. I interrupted you. I'm sorry. Continue.
No, I just trailed off. I'm done.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I didn't. All right. Perfect. I feel better. Yeah, I think you're right, Councilor Shasha, that we had there was sort of some ambiguity, if you will, on that, and where that laid. Could the council object to a council president's appointments? And in looking up to Rule 3, which is appeals and decisions of the president shall, and I'm only reading some of these out loud because I know we have people listening at home. The president shall preserve decorum and decide all questions of order subject to appeal the question. Any member of the council may appeal the decision of the president by motion. No other business shall be in order until the question of the appeal is decided. In the case of an appeal from a ruling of the president, the question shall be, shall the decision of the president stand as to the decision of the council? The vote upon the question of appeal from the ruling of the president shall be by roll call to be decided by a simple majority. If a member transgresses the rules of the council, the president or any member addressing the president shall him or her to order, in which case he or she shall be seated unless permitted to explain. So yes, I agree that the president is one vote. The president is not a dictator nor has all power. And I do think that there should be ways to check that power when needed. Again, we don't look at it with the people that we know. Like I've said throughout this, we look at it as sort of a faceless council, and you should want to address things that could come up. I do think it's an important thing to have the ability to appeal a decision of a president in almost any capacity, because they are just one vote of 9. They have certain officiating powers they are given, and agenda item powers they are given, and seating arrangement powers they're given. But I do think that there has to be a check and a balance to everyone's power. So I am okay with keeping it as we have added for clarification that appointments are subject to Rule 3, appeals from decision of the president. Is any further discussion on that?
I think what I'd like to point out is that in Rule 3, where it says appeals from decision of the president, the first line says the president shall preserve decorum and decide all questions of order. And that, what that suggests is that these appeals are meant to decide issues of decorum and things like Robert's rules. And I think that if we change Rule 8 so that we deliberately change it so that now this Rule 3 is going to apply to Rule 8, that's a significant change, and not just a specification. The language of Rule 3 is specific about decorum and rules of order, not about any other power of the president. And therefore, I think it constitutes a significant change in the power of the president. And if that is what this council wills, then we should be clear about that.
Okay. Anything further from Councilor Shasha, Councilor Mackin as to that?
I disagree with that interpretation. I think that these rules give the president limited powers, and those powers are stated that those are the powers to preserve decorum and decide all questions of order. That there's no decision that the president can make that is not appealable.
Councilor Mackin?
I agree with Councilor Sasha there, but also in the interest of getting this done, I mean, these were ones we settled a while ago and haven't come back up. And you know, as fun as this is, I would like to start moving towards the completion of these rules.
Okay,
That's
so
fine.
I'm okay with Rule 8 staying as it is. Councilor Shasha, I think you're okay with it staying as we have written it. Councilor Mack, what's your feeling on it?
Yes, I'm okay with it.
And Councilor Flaherty, are you opposed to it staying in the way we have it written?
Yes.
You're opposed. Okay. So noting that it's getting to 7:15, I could suggest another option. We could vote, and obviously noting the fact that anything can be addressed. We can vote as a package as a whole, and Councilor Flaherty, you could oppose the recommendation based on your opposition to Rule 8. Or we could make a motion to approve it, and you could sort of note that you're okay that you are in support of everything with the exception of Rule 8.
I'm happy to approve everything with the exception of Rule 8.
Okay, so I think you'll just Clerk Semino, correct me if I'm wrong, but she could vote that way, correct? If someone makes a motion to forward these rules as amended favorably to the council, Councilor Flaherty could vote yes. People voting yes could vote yes, but she could vote yes with the exception of Rule 8. Is that accurate?
That's perfectly fine.
Okay.
Right.
right.
Before we do vote
Yep.
on them, I do have one question, but if you want to continue with your
Nope.
statement.
Turning it over to Clerk Semino.
Okay, just two things. One was Rule 8. I was mentioning a few of these items to Town Clerk Casey. He's the person who actually wrote these town council rules.
Mhm.
If he wasn't so busy with 3 elections, I would have suggested to have him come meet with us. I think he would have had a lot of clarification on a lot of these. But I did mention Rule 8, and he said that isn't what Rule 3 was meant for. He said, you know, basically Rule 8 is the committee appointments. That's it, period, done. And that's kind of the way he said it. So that was just, you know, just one thing that we had a quick conversation about. And then I just had a quick question about 42 before we end the meeting. what Counselor Sasha added, is that going to be added to 42 at this point?
You know, Council, what was that again? And I'm sorry, I didn't note it in my rule itself. It was about the recommendation, or
Committee reports may include a recommendation to the council president for a public comment period.
Were we pausing on that one as well?
yeah. I think just pausing on that, because again, you're starting. Are you okay, Councilor Shasha, moving forward? And then you could always address that at the full council.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. All right, so with that said, we have gone through the rules. With Rule 8, I appreciate Clerk Casey's insight. I disagree. I think it says any member of the council may appeal. The way he wrote it is the way he wrote it, but I think we've done some clarification of our own. I think he wrote it back in 2008, which is 12 years ago. So I disagree. But like we said, we can move that forward and we can address it at the full council. So with that said, do I have a motion to approve these rules with the amendments that we have made in these meetings?
So moved.
Okay, I have a motion by Councilor Shasha. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second by Councilor Mackin. I would need a roll call vote, turning it over to Clerk Semino.
Counselor Ringus,
Aye.
Counselor Sasha,
Yes.
Counselor Flaherty,
With the exception of Rule 8, yes.
Counselor Mackin.
Yes.
All right, so I believe we have, with those votes, Clerk Semino, we have a favorable recommendation to the full council, 3 votes as to the exception of this package as a whole, and 1 vote with a favorable recommendation with the exception of Rule 8. Is that accurate?
Mhm.
All right, so that is how it will be reported to the full council. With that said, thank you to everyone, all of you. This has been a lot of work. And I think we really, probably since 2008, when these were first written, this is probably the most thorough review I've seen of them. We've taken out some things, we've changed some things, we've added some things. So I think this was a labor of love for all of us. But I think, like I said, these are important because they are, when we know them and how to refer back to them, these are how we can limit each other, and these are how we can run our meetings effectively and ensure that things are going a smooth and lawful process. So thank you to all of you for all of the work. With that said, there is no new business. So we would be looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a motion by Councilor Mackin.
Second.
I have a second by Councilor Shasha. Clerk Semino.
Counselor Ringus,
Aye.
Counselor Sasha,
Yes.
Counselor Flaherty,
Yes.
Counselor Mackin.
Aye.
That's 4 in favor to adjourn.
So that is a unanimous vote, and the motion to adjourn passes. And I'll see you guys all in about 3 minutes.
Yeah.